So for me, art house is therefore more, I would say, not chained to commerce.
Yeah.
Is more free, is not limited ke, oh, this has to not bore people, this has to be entertaining, this has to be limited. It is more a freer form, which is kind of exploring something deeper, where that artist is trying to give you an insight about something. If you are lucky to find that support in an institution, then that is also a possibility. So
Yeah.
it's not that only big budget films are commercial films. You can get a big budget to make something which is meaningful. As a painter, you are painting a canvas that is external. But as an artist, as an actor, you are the bloody canvas. एक पलक तुम्हारा आंख का एक सुर है वो तुम्हारे आंख.
Yeah. Hi, hello, namaste. Welcome to Where We Talk About Films, a podcast where we talk about films and where I keep screwing up the hair continuity throughout the show. कुछ शर्म नहीं इस बार भी होने वाला है. So anyway, let's get used to this. But yeah, today's conversation is with Oorvazi Irani. She's been a mentor to me. She has taught me a lot of things about art. And if you're coming from a place where you think that art cinema बहुत pretentious है, then you might get a better perspective from someone who understands that kind of cinema. And the conversation is about everything, about paintings, photography. It's basically about how an artist expresses himself through his art form. So, yeah, अरे थोड़ा patience रखो, समझ जाएगा, art भी समझ जाएगा. So let's just get started. So I grew up on hardcore Hindi mainstream movies, and my perspective towards films was on the opposite end of the spectrum from where it is now. And one of the biggest reasons behind this change is a workshop I had with our today's guest. She basically changed my perspective towards art as a whole. She changed my perspective, and she made me actually understand what film is as an art form. She's a filmmaker, actor, film educationalist. She's been a great mentor to me, and this episode is really special to me. So let's welcome Oorvazi ma'am. Hi, how are you?
Hi Vidar, it's a pleasure to be being here.
Yeah.
And to see your journey. I remember the first time you came to me and we were discussing about your switch from engineering. And I tried to give you a safety net. I said, why don't you try and do both? But you took the plunge, and I'm so proud seeing your progress and your journey so far.
Yeah. So how are you? You just like battled COVID and your quarantine. How was it? This whole lockdown period for you?
Quarantine was great because I think for an artist, somewhere you are introspecting, and I kind of did a few small little paintings. I'm an amateur painter. So I kind of went to my childhood and, went down memory lane. I enjoyed myself. I like my me time, so I enjoyed myself.
Okay.
And luckily I had mild symptoms. So, it just started with nausea, and then nausea kind of went away.
Okay.
So it was not like in the hospital and not life-threatening. But it felt nice that you received support from your colleagues and your workspace, and everybody said, just chill, don't worry. That was nice.
Yeah. Okay. And okay, so like going back to the beginning of your journey, where did this journey with films begin? Like, where did it start?
Okay, so at one level, there are two dimensions to it, I think. One is that one is with filmmaking, and one is with my kind of knowledge of films and aesthetics of films. So that came later.
Okay.
I would say that somewhere filmmaking was in my blood because my dad was a filmmaker.
Yeah.
And he had his production company, which he started in 1975.
Okay.
And he has a very interesting background, very illustrious background, where he's been associated with Chetan Anand. He's worked as a general manager for Chetan Anand. So he's been part of the film industry. I don't know, many people don't know of Chetan Anand in today's contemporary times, but maybe Devanand is a more popular name, the Chetan Anand Devanand family. So that was a great experience which dad kind of went through and always speaks about. But that was very typical Hindi cinema. At the same time, it was very art cinema, And then Daddy's journey was with Channel 4 London. In fact, that's where he became a friend with Farooq Dhondi because of the projects that he did.
Yeah.
And then therefore I started off when I was in college itself.
Okay.
So I was in Jai Hind College. I was studying arts, and apna company tha, and dad said, why don't you start, like, being part of the projects.
Yeah.
So for my first project was a travelogue series on the exile route of Lord Ram.
Oh.
And I
Yeah.
got to be, and it was for Channel 4. So it was like a big project.
Yeah.
And it was 6 parts, half an hour each. So it was literally like a film, 3
Yeah.
hour ho
Yeah.
gaya.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was part of the research, direction,
Mm-hmm.
production, everything.
Mm-hmm.
So my journey started, and since it's your own company, at one level I was assisting,
Mm-hmm.
and I was the spot boy to the boss. So that is interesting in its own way. At
Yeah.
one level, you feel, oh, you want to start your own
Mm-hmm.
thing, and you feel like daddy is not doing justice enough.
Huh.
At the same time, you feel it's so exciting, and because of dad, you're getting an exposure to this whole thing. So mixed feelings, and of course, at that time, you have all these stupid notions. Afterwards, you realize more. I think
Yeah.
the value of that journey, and you take for granted when you are at that time कि मतलब कितने projects करेंगे,
Huh.
you know.
Uh-huh.
But life changes, dynamics change, and I went into different directions, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So one was that aspect of filmmaking where dad was part of filmmaking,
Yeah.
so automatically I took to it. My sister didn't. Not necessarily everybody goes to what your parents are doing, but I think being an artist somewhere, I got attracted to it automatically. I didn't have to think, or nobody had to initiate me into making films or into filmmaking. Also, maybe being the elder somewhere in the family, the elder daughter, I took
Yeah.
to that. I don't know
Yeah.
what is the reason. And then somewhere I had this thing of maybe I will train, I'll go to FTI, but that never happened. And so I am quite a self-taught
Yeah.
professional in everything that I have done insofar in life. And so it's the school of hard knocks, right? From learning to the shoot to anything that I have done later. And then my aesthetics in film started later, when actually I started teaching film.
Okay.
So when I was invited, and that was again, I was invited by a friend to kind of take sessions on filmmaking. He said, your taste in cinema is good. I don't think I had any great taste at that time, but you speak well. So I kind of dwelled into it. And when I dwelled into it, I kind of discovered this whole world of auteurs, of artists who are making films. And that really attracted me. So that was really my introduction to cinema, as I call it. Otherwise, it was very regular, popular cinema that we all see, Amir Khan and, Nach Gana and all that.
Okay. So what you mentioned right now, Amir Khan and everything. So there's this term which people say that art house filmmaking, so to say. What do you think, like, what is your perspective on, like, people classify a lot of, like, specific films as art house films. What do you think, what does it actually mean, that making an art house film?
I think, see, there are a lot, it's a very associated term with time, according to me, when you talk about art house. So if you talk about art house, let's say 20 years ago, it would mean something else. And I'll briefly go into that in terms of the history of cinema. If you talk about art house today, it means something else. Depends on who you talk to, which kind of a filmmaker, he will define art house in a different way. But having said that, for me, what art house means is that I think I would like to say more independent art house, the way I am terming it, or the way I would like to make my films. Because one is that this is two very different streams. One is that there is a commercial product that is made, which is run for money, which is a product.
Yeah.
Like in any industry you make, so this is also an industry, and you make a product where your outcome is supposed to be the income that you get. So the more number of people you put on the seats, the more eyeballs, you're all after that. So you will use formula, you will use whatever you need to use to try and get that, right? You will use sex, you will use violence, you will use shock power, you will use whatever. So that there is one, so I'm talking about extremes. Now there can be things in between, right? But one extreme is therefore that there is a filmmaking which is addressed for making money, and it is an industry, purely that. And another extreme is where it is just like any other medium of art.
Mhm.
In fact, it is so much richer because it has includes all the mediums. It can
Yeah.
include performing arts, it can include painting,
Yeah.
everything. It can include music,
Mhm.
everything. So at that purest level or that extreme spectrum, it is a way of expressing. It's a
Mhm.
way of an insight that an artist gives.
Mhm.
So so for me, art house is therefore something which is therefore more, I would say, not chained to commerce,
Yeah.
is more free, is not limited ke, oh, this has to not bore people, this has to be entertaining, this has to be limited. It is more a freer form which is kind of exploring something deeper, where that artist is trying to give you an insight about something, you
Mhm.
know where that's what life is all about, of being human.
Yeah.
It's about making sense of what life is. And
Mhm.
if that is, it's not about how boring or entertaining, it's not about slow pace or fast pace, but it's about something that that person has realized and is trying to share with you.
Yeah.
So that is, these are the two opposite spectrums for
Mhm.
me. And if I very quickly touch upon history, what
Mhm.
happened is that there has always been a time in the evolution of the language of cinema. Of course, the initial stage was where language was developing,
Yeah.
where there was no language, right? They
Yeah.
were finding their own ground. And in the initial phases, therefore, we had the Lumiere brothers who were just opening the camera and recording reality.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know, you call that art or you call it commerce? I mean,
Huh.
it's both, right?
Uh-huh.
Uh, so, but once this basic grammar started getting developed
Hmm.
and people saw that, oh, there is money that can be, got
Yeah.
from this art form,
Yeah. Yeah.
not art form, from this medium,
Huh.
let's say,
Huh.
let's
Huh.
call it a medium, right?
Huh.
Then you had this whole industry that was developing, and there was always a counter industry that was developing with artists who were trying to break that in
Okay.
many ways. And
Mhm.
that itself was a different kind of industry.
Hmm.
And then there was a phase where, like Hollywood big bosses, for example, the big studios themselves encouraged this artistic cinema and made new wave Hollywood cinema, and because they said that, yeah, there is a market for that also,
Huh.
you know so
Yeah.
in the pure spectrums, there is the product,
Hmm.
because film is the industry, and
Mhm.
then there is the pure artistic expression.
Yeah.
And every time there has been these two tracks of something which is addressing this commercial thing, and then there has been this parallel movement all along history in the world and in India, where it has tried to counter that. And
Mhm.
so for example, a filmmaker like Martin Scorsese, or
Hmm.
some of these filmmakers,
Yeah.
they are trying in the commercial mold itself to try and make something artistic meaningful, not
Hmm.
just formula or not just
Mhm.
cut paste. There is something that they want to say,
Hmm.
something that they want to express.
Yeah.
So today, even more, I think it's become a blurring of the lines
Yeah.
between artistic cinema
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
popular cinema.
Hmm.
Earlier there was a very sharp divide.
Hmm.
So when you talk about Indian art cinema, Govind Nilani, Sham Benegal, they were like, we don't want Satyajit Ray,
Yeah.
This is a very, popular cinema was a very formulistic, theatrical, larger than life kind of perspective.
Yeah.
And the art cinema as we know it, or we call it, was more subtle, more
Hmm.
um, life as we know it, and
Mhm.
life as we experience it. So
Yeah.
that was the notion of art somewhere,
Okay.
art cinema, that kind of historically was connected to it.
Mhm. But like one very popular counter argument towards this is that the purest of artist who's expressing
Yeah,
himself, he still has
yeah,
to manage a lot of money related things, right? Because filmmaking as an art form is very expensive. Like it
correct,
is very costly. So how do
correct.
you like then what is the middle ground? Because somewhere down the line money will be an issue, right? So how do you manage that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so that's the challenge, and it's also the sources from where you get it. And
Okay.
sometimes there is a lot of support, like in, not so much in India, not always, but there are institutions, there are spaces who completely respect that there needs to be a film which is not just for commerce,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there then they will give you the money. It doesn't mean that because you're making an artistic film, you're not going to get enough money to do that canvas or to make that. And that then, I think, somewhere also depends on maybe the reputation of the artist, that he's
Mhm.
been able to get that trust of that organization who will give you that money to indulge in something which is not just putting
Yeah.
people on the seats.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it is a challenge, always it is a
Mhm.
challenge, and it is easier always, I
Mhm.
accept that it's easier to have a smaller budget because you can experiment. That's
Yeah.
what everybody says. The
Yeah.
bigger the budget, the less you can experiment. But when you have maybe a reputation and a trust and an organization who is trying to support the value of art, then a bigger budget will come your way, can come your way, because it is just another means of increasing your canvas. It is
Yeah.
like saying that you've got a bigger canvas and I need more money for that bigger canvas. So if you are lucky to find that support in an institution, then that is also a possibility. So
Yeah.
it's not that only big budget films are commercial films. You can get a big budget to make something which is meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah, totally makes sense,
But
but that's
it's a
very
challenge.
difficult.
But it's
Yeah,
a challenge.
yeah,
It's definitely.
exactly.
I agree.
So, okay, this is again about the education part of it, like how you. But when did you make your first film as a director, or when did you act for the first time? What was that like?
Okay, so I think if I go back to what I was discussing,
Huh.
I started off being kind of got in touch with the world of filmmaking through my dad.
Yes.
That was very much making films for a particular kind of audience. It was a Channel 4 audience or a European market. It was a targeted. It was not. It was somewhere commercial film in
Okay.
that sense. It was of course for television, etc. But you were targeting a particular sensibility and aesthetic. There, you were not interested in exploring your identity. None of that was happening in that space.
Yeah.
Because you were taking issues and you were doing it, whatever, in the truest possible way. So our travelogue was not about, just a simple Ram Yatra in the sense of like a holy, glamorous person going around touching people's feet. But it was very much about questioning myth and reality and getting historians on site, etc. So it was quite stimulating in that way.
Yeah.
But it was not about finding your creative voice. This happened, I think, in around 2011, when dad and I decided that because technology with the 5D, was becoming very accessible.
Yeah.
So when we used to shoot these documentaries and these travelogues and all these other films that we used to do for Channel 4 or other production houses, it was like a 16 mm, 35 mm camera, which is very expensive. You don't even think about, you can't buy it, and therefore to make it and hire it and make your own film was not really accessible. And dad really came from that world. I mean, I maybe was in the flux. I was there, and then there was digital world that was part of our world. But the 5D, I think, as a technology somewhere, was the first step which dad and I kind of decided together that and dad really, actually, I should give him credit. He pushed me. Like, go ahead, make your first film. You'll never be ready. There's never a perfect time. बहुत धक्का मारा, मेरे को गुस्सा भी आता था, but I think I'm grateful now that so my first film was Mamaiji, which was my maternal grandmother, and it was not immediately that I think got the idea that I'll make a film on her as a character. It was a process. I was trying to, in fact, ask myself that if I'm going to make films about my own voice, because I was as an artist trying to find my voice, then my first question was that what is it that I can say that has not been done? I mean, that's, I think, because for me, at least as a person, that's very important. And I think it's important for any artist. So what are you contributing? What are you bringing to the table that is not already there?
Yeah.
Nothing is completely original. Having said that, we are all building on foundations. But I think the truest or the closest can be our personal world, our dreams, our relationships, our emotions, how we have been affected by a particular experience, etc. So I started from that very simple premise. And I said that I felt that my religion, that was an interesting or important part of my identity. And even though I'm not like a religious person per se, I don't go to the fire temple every day or do any of that, or like do some regular prayers and all. But there is an attachment, and I feel that that sense of belonging to a very ancient religion was interesting. So somewhere this whole thing of bringing that identity into play was something that started me off thinking. And then finally it led to this idea of it, I think, started by wanting to make my grandmother a kind of a narrator and part of this whole thing. And then it said, no, but she itself is like a great character. And why not her?
Mm-hmm.
And then I went into that whole space and I said, she's a fascinating character. And for me, that idea was all about the extraordinary in the ordinary.
Yeah.
And that I think is another part of a powerful concept of art, that you
Mm-hmm.
don't have to make a film about a celebrity or about necessarily about somebody who is like very famous.
Yeah.
Yes, there is a learning in that, but
Mm-hmm.
every little person in our life has something to share with us.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore I think that was beautiful. And the
Yeah.
challenge of course was, which I was questioned initially, in fact by
Mm-hmm.
my somebody from my own family very close to me who loves me, but didn't understand that who's going to be interested in your grandmother's story,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know. And I think that's a very, again, a very interesting question for the lay audience, maybe if there's anybody seeing this, that
Mm-hmm.
I think that delicate balance between how if as a filmmaker and an artist you can take the personal and make it universal.
Yeah.
And hopefully, I hope I've been able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And when she saw the film, she was quite touched, and I think that's when she realized the journey, or
Yeah.
how something personal
Yeah.
can be
Yeah.
very universal.
Mm-hmm.
And it still touches me when some, like, this is, I think, one of my films which really, I think it's also the purest because it's the first maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And my cousin, in fact, Alzain Dhenugara, who was also a kind of a collaborator who helped me with the research, and I
Yeah.
remember sitting with her, and it was this one day that we completely, I know it was very inspired, sitting in
Mm-hmm.
some cafe coffee day or some
Mm-hmm.
some cafe, I think in Lokhandwala, where we I think it just flowed out that this basic concept of where the film will be set. And it then just perfectly, I think, worked with my aesthetics of,
Mm-hmm.
without planning it, uh, going out and planning it intellectually,
Mm-hmm.
that the world will be suspended between the real and the unreal. I didn't want to
Yeah.
do a very documentary, real thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was my first
Yeah.
experience with
Which
filmmaking.
I really want to talk about. So one thing you mentioned is that when a layman watches it, maybe he won't understand everything. And that's what actually happened with me, because when I had the workshop, that was the first time I was getting introduced to anything except Salman Khan, Amir Khan, Shah Rukh Khan. You know what I mean? So
Really?
yeah,
But then what really motivated you to make films? I mean,
when
sorry,
I,
I'm going a bit on you, but
no, when I actually made one short film, really bad, terrible, but I just genuinely loved the process of making it. It just made like, and
okay.
after that,
So it was
when,
the process that attracted you first,
yeah, the
and the
process,
aesthetics developed later on.
yeah, later on, like, yeah. So when I watched it, I get the what happened in the film, and the feel of it, what you wanted to
Yeah,
say. I understood that on a subconscious level. But when I watch the
yeah,
film right now again for the whole thing, I'm able to appreciate the smallest of things, like the apple on the table, like the reference to Dali's watch, like the production design, like the wide shot, like the cross dissolves, and everything. The sound design, the music. Oh, I love the music. It doesn't look like a first film. So all of these things came in your first film. So what was the process before that? Because this doesn't look like you just picked up a camera and shot something, right?
no,
There
no,
was
not at all.
a lot of, I felt a lot of mature aesthetic in your first film. So where did that come from? How did you educate yourself for that? I know the technical end, maybe you were prepared with working with your father and everything, but what about the aesthetic part of it?
Aesthetic part of it was more instinctive. I didn't go out
Okay.
and say, okay, now I'll start studying Dali and then I'll use Dali.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of just, I think, it was instinctive. And I think a lot of my work, and when we talk about acting, I think I'll talk about it even
Mm-hmm.
more. It was maybe something that was part of my intuitive aesthetic. And
Okay.
now when I talk about it, I love to discover myself in a way. So
Mm-hmm.
I realized that there is this attraction to minimalism. There is
Mm.
this attraction to surrealism.
Yeah.
And that is somewhere going back to my urge as an artist or as a human being,
Mm-hmm.
of maybe in a way trying to find spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
not in the bugu way, not in
Mm-hmm.
the guru sishya kind of way, but
Yeah.
more in, through my art.
Yeah.
And in a, I mean, I'm labeling it for myself, but I think more innocent, more pure,
Mm-hmm.
in that way. And for me, I've realized that I think what is really a high is, or what is really driving everything in my art or my life,
Mm-hmm.
is trying to discover, and I think we all do it at one level, but not consciously maybe.
Yeah.
Trying to discover who am I,
Hmm.
trying to discover, these very fundamental questions of life. And I think everybody does that in a certain way in their art and in life, even if they're not.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is a crisis that creates that.
Yeah. Okay.
But coming back to the film, the process of the film. So as I said that a lot of it was this whole idea, like in Anahita's Law, my recent film, I spent like years just not being able to be inspired and crack what I finally did, because I felt it was not unique enough. And then I arrived at that.
Yeah.
But this was quite inspired in the sense of, as I told you, that when I decided to make a film on her, we just sat there one day and the whole, I don't know, I think if I remember right, the whole storyboard literally was there, and I think I cracked that this space was very important.
Yeah.
And that space is really the film. And that was the challenge for me as a filmmaker, that I can take the audience into another universe. That is the beauty, or what excited me about a filmmaker. Besides, of course, the character, that I'm, as a filmmaker, what can I do? What am I being able to do? Am I being able to transport you into another world? And there's a beautiful interpretation of it by somebody in the audience in FTI when I had screened it there, which I'd like to mention here.
Yeah.
He interpreted it as a waiting room to heaven. She's sitting in a waiting room to heaven. I mean, I found that quite intriguing, So it's a space where, it's real, yet it's not real, And I think that in my work is quite, interests me in some way, because I think it's not the mundane reality. It is how you can question reality through, like doing something creative.
Yeah. But talking about the references, like the Dali reference, or when I was having the workshop, we talked about a lot about paintings, and you actually introduced me to world of paintings. And after that, I can't paint. I try, but I love looking at paintings and studying them and everything. So what are the other art forms which influence your filmmaking, or the way you express yourself right now, or throughout, I mean? Yeah.